and another one done this month, this April. We read Frère François, or in the English translation, I believe it's God's Fool, The Life and Times of Saint Francis of Assisi. And this was a very joyful book. As always, if you haven't signed up yet, please do. I've put a link in the description as well as in the comments. And next month we are reading Religion and the Rise of Western Culture, the classic study of medieval civilization by Christopher Dawson. We meet up once a month and we discuss the book. There's a Telegram group where I try to motivate you to read, as well as other people motivating me and others to read, and we share our favorite tidbits and stuff like that. So I hope to see you there. Quick note on the writer. So Julien Green is an American writer born in France, in Paris. He grew up, his mother was a Protestant, his dad was some other Protestant, from another Protestant denomination. His parents were very strict, particularly his mother, when it came to their religion. And I believe it was only after she died that his father converted to Catholicism, and Julien Green followed suit. He became Buddhist at one point and came back to the faith, but not entirely. But his favorite saint was Saint Francis of Assisi. Julien Green wrote all of his books in French, and so I read this in French. It was actually my husband who suggested the book because he had read it last year and said it was a pretty easy read. A note on the language, so not the story or anything, but if you are learning French, this is a really good book to read because the sentence structures are pretty easy. There are a few words that you'll come into contact with that of course you don't know, but for the most part it's a pretty easy read. So if you're trying to learn French and want to learn about St. Francis of Assisi, even though he's half Italian, half French, this is good. So it does begin at St. Francis' birth and the change of his name. His mother wanted to name him Giovanni, but his father wanted him to be more French, so he named him Francis François. The chapters are very short, but very packed with information. And whenever it came to the history of the time, it was great for me because I struggle when it comes to learning about history, just because I've mentioned this before. Learning history in Canada is not the best. They don't really teach history well, especially in public schools. I never felt like I was reading just like a Wikipedia page. Like I said, the language is pretty simple, but it's full of useful description and not in a textbook kind of way. So I'm going to share 3 of my favorite things about the book. There are many things I love about the book, but let me just share 3. I didn't realize I didn't know that much about St. Francis of Assisi, apart from the few things that everybody knows. That he wanted to be a chevalier, a knight, and he gave everything up. But there were a few things that surprised me that I actually didn't know. That one of them that I love was that he used to sing. He would sing all the time, out loud, just walking down the street by himself or with his brothers, and that was one way that he would praise God, was through singing. François est parmi les plus actifs, et pour donner à tous du cœur à l'ouvrage, il chante comme il chantera toute sa vie, sauf à la fin lorsqu'il composera son chant d'adieu à la terre en ombrien. C'est toujours en chantant qu'il travaillera avec tout le peuple à la construction de solides murailles pour protéger Assise de tout retour offensif, ces murailles qu'on voit encore aujourd'hui. He was always singing, always singing, and he was a very, very happy saint. My husband was telling me this. I didn't realize that the Italian saints are always happy and the Spanish saints are always sad. Frère François was always very joyful, full of joy. Julien Green used the word allégresse all the time throughout the book. Allégresse, allégresse, allégresse. And yeah, he was a very happy saint. There's even a part where he joked with Frère Bonaparte, I think, Yeah, so Frère Bonaparte would make him food, and then Saint Francis of Assisi would, I don't know, dip it in water and put dirt on his food. And this is what he would say. So Frère Bonaparte says, Je fais mon mieux pour te préparer des plats que tu puisses manger. Et qu'est-ce que tu fais? Tu y mêles de l'eau et des cendres. And then Frère François says, Frère Bonaparte, c'est l'intention qui compte. Pur chez toi comme chez moi. Dieu nous récompensera l'un et l'autre. So he was a joker. He was a funny guy. And that made him even more human. To me, you know how we always put saints up because he was intense, don't get me wrong. He was very happy, but he was a very intense saint. He demanded the highest of quality in the way we worship, in the way that we live our lives for God. And so when he meant no money, he meant no money. Living with nothing but whatever God is going to give us, provide us with. Another thing that I really liked is how Julien Green describes the different events, but in a way that makes you meditate on the event. There are always questions pointed out at the different parts of the book, all over the text. And the fact that there are these questions makes you meditate, and it's almost easier to picture what was happening. One of my favorite things is when Saint Francois took off all his clothes, when he just wanted to get rid of everything and to make sure his dad knew. So this part. Sans un mot, il arrache ses vêtements avec une précipitation fougueuse et les lance l'un après l'autre aux pieds de son père. Tous, jusqu'à ses chausses. Et par-dessus le marché la maudite bourse qu'il avait belle et bien rapportée et cachée dans une poche. Le voilà, nu comme au jour de sa naissance. Nu aujourd'hui pour sa seconde naissance. So, you see what I mean? It's simple, but still very profound sentences. And he was so dramatic too, like a real Italian. I'm not trying to offend any Italians, but he had a lot of drama, St. Francis. This is something I really loved. The state of the church during St. Francis of Assisi's time was just as bad as how it is today. Maybe ours is worse. I don't know. I guess it's kind of relative, but it was still in a really, really bad state. You had heretics, you had the Crusades, everything was going on. But St. Francis stayed Catholic. And this passage is one of my favorites. So, mais François tenait bon pour la même raison qu'il faisait que le gros du peuple ne cédait pas sur l'essentiel. Au milieu de ces excès, l'Église gardait le pouvoir des clés, celui d'ouvrir les portes du paradis par l'absolution des péchés. François restait immuablement catholique. So despite whatever was going on, St. Francis knew that the church is the one that holds the keys to heaven, to our salvation. And despite whatever is going on, despite whatever its members are doing, clergy or laymen, the church still held the truth, still holds the truth. And so he didn't change despite that, because that's one of the arguments people use when it comes to either leaving the faith or not converting, or just basically judging the church on the people. So its fruits, what the church teaches is different to us. Just as I've said in a previous video, if a doctor who is a smoker and also diabetic tells you to stop smoking and stop eating sugar, what he's saying is still true, even though what he's doing isn't good. Julien Green asks, can you imagine what it would have been like when St. Francis of Assisi saw St. Dominic and in the same room? Like, can you imagine what they had said to each other? So, pendant un intervalle du concile, on croit qu'il aurait prié les deux fondateurs de se rencontrer chez lui. Simple hypothèse que ce face-à-face de deux des plus grands hommes du Moyen-Âge. Que ce ne donnerait-on pas pour savoir exactement? Si cela s'était passé, François, lui, lisait dans les âmes, aurait compris en un instant qu'il avait devant lui un ami de Dieu, et comme il avait des yeux pour voir, il aurait remarqué en connaisseur l'heureuse coupe de l'habit blanc et la solide qualité du drap. Dominic aurait pu avoir les mêmes vues à la fois surnaturelles et pratiques. La sainteté de François était évidente et sa misérable tunique trahissait un dépouillement absolu de toute vanité humaine. Il n'y avait qu'une chose qu'on pouvait prendre à ce mendiant et il offrait à qui en voulait, la pauvreté. I really like that. Made me imagine that. Can you imagine what they both would have thought of each other once they, because there are two different kinds of religious, right? Living the Word of God in slightly different ways. What I got out of the book in general was just that he was just a happy, joyful man who wanted to simply live for God, for Jesus. And like all saints, they demand so much. They almost demand perfection out of everybody else, and everybody just doesn't understand that living for God requires a lot. And it's hard to, I guess that was his main frustration, that, his order, he wanted it to be simple. He wanted to live poorly for God. But then within not even the span of like a few years, his order started to change. He started to add things and to make it more comfortable. St. Francis just wanted us to live simply for God and to only think of God in that. Though we might be poor here in this life, in the next we will be rich because we'll be in his presence. It is hard for me to say more without just telling you the whole story, but I think you should read it for yourself. It is easy to read, and it's one of those books that you can just pick up bit by bit every day. I'm going to read more about Julien Green, more of his books, because he is an interesting person. He's very serious apparently in his other works, so that'll be interesting. So I'll be reading more Julien Green. So what did you think of God's Fool? Leave a comment down below. I'd love to know what you thought. What tidbits did you like, and what did it teach you? After that, let us go on to the next one. Religion and the Rise of Western Culture, the Classic Study of Medieval Civilization, by Christopher Dawson. Chapter 1. Introduction. The Significance of the Western Development. In my previous series of lectures, I abstained as far as possible from dealing with the history of Christian culture, not because this lies outside the scope of the Gifford lectures, but because it is the culture to which we all in some sense belong, and therefore it is impossible for us to study it in the same way as the cultures of the remote past, which we can only see through the opaque medium of archaeology, or the cultures of the non-European world, which we have to understand from the outside and from a distance. This involves a difference in the quality of our knowledge, which may almost be compared to the difference between the astronomer's knowledge of another planet and the geographer's knowledge of the Earth on which we live. There is not only a far greater mass of material available for the study of Western culture than for that of any other, but our knowledge is also more intimate and internal. Western culture has been the atmosphere we breathe and the life we live. It is our own way of life and the way of life of our ancestors, and therefore we know it not merely by documents and monuments, but from our personal experience. Hence, any study of religion which ignores and leaves on one side the accumulated experience of the Christian past and looks exclusively to the remote and partially incomprehensible evidence derived from the study of alien religious traditions, or even to our own abstract notions of the nature of religion and the condition of religious knowledge, is bound to be not merely incomplete, but insubstantial and unreal. And this is most of all the case when we are considering, as in these lectures, the problem of religion and culture, the intricate and far-reaching network of relations that unite the social way of life with the spiritual beliefs and values, which are accepted by society as the ultimate laws of life and the ultimate standards of individual and social behavior. For these relations can only be studied in the concrete, in their total historical reality. The great world religions are, as it were, great rivers of sacred tradition which flow down through the ages and through changing historical landscapes which they irrigate and fertilize. But as a rule, we cannot trace them to their source, which is lost in unexplored tracts of the remote past. It is rare indeed to find a culture in which the whole course of this religious development can be traced from beginning to the end in the full light of history. But the history of Christendom is an outstanding exception to this tendency. We know the historical environment in which Christianity first arose. We possess the letters of the founders of the churches to the first Christian communities in Europe, and we can trace in detail the successive stages by which the new religion penetrated the West. Thenceforward, at least during the last 16 centuries, the mass of material available for study is so huge that it exceeds the capacity of the individual mind to grasp it. Consequently, the study of Western religion and Western culture is difficult from the opposite reason to that which renders the study of prehistoric and ancient Oriental religions difficult. Because we know too much rather than too little. Because the vast field of study has had to be divided among a number of different sciences, each of which is further subdivided into specialized branches of study, which in turn become autonomous fields of study.